the space for political participation is suffering from not being made used of enough. It is not occupied enough. It is there in theory, but we're not claiming it fully. But the moment you get together with others, and if it's a smaller group even, you multiply your power.
It's time to change the world. It's time for something better. We're telling the stories of people who are changing the world and how you can help. Our daily actions have a massive impact, so what will we do about it? We can remake the world, because guess what? We can. Hi everyone, I'm Nathan Gardner, and this is We Can Remake the World, a podcast about people who are changing the world and how you can help. We're going to start something new this year. Every guest episode, we're going to kick off the episode with a segment called The Good News. Because positive change is already happening all around the world every day, and we should talk about it. The pandemic is one piece of what's happening out there, but there's so much more and a lot of good, a lot to celebrate, a lot to learn from. So here we go. Today's first piece of good news. Just last week, in January, it was announced that the Save the Redwoods League, a California conservation group, as you can imagine, with the redwoods, would be donating and transferring an area of 523 acres of land in Northern California's Mendocino County to a coalition of native tribes called the Intertribal Sinkyone Wilderness Council, returning lands that were lost to colonial occupation hundreds of years ago. The Intertribal Council has renamed this portion of the forest Tsi'itledun, meaning fish run place in the Sinkyone language, which was its original name prior to settlers arriving. The name comes from the fact that wild fish breed and swim in the rivers of this land and through the forests, including salmon and other species known on the West Coast. This will add to the 180,000 acres already under guardianship by the Sinkyone Council, who has been growing their presence in land stewardship in this area in California. And it's a big win for tribal stewardship of ancestral lands across the board, which is a growing movement in the US and Canada, which we spoke about recently a bit with our guest filmmaker Sam Rose Phillips back in December. Priscilla Hunter, chairwoman of the Sinkyone Council, told the Associated Press, "It's a real blessing. It's like a healing for our ancestors. I know our ancestors are happy. This was given to us to protect." Our next piece of good news. For 1 week, the final week in December, the state of South Australia generated 100% of its energy from renewable resources, namely wind and solar. This is a new record for Australia and possibly for the world, for an energy grid of this size to sustain itself fully for that length of time, fully from renewable sources. With a population of 1.7 million people, centered mostly on the coast of that part of Australia and in the capital city of Adelaide, the entire state ran for 1 week, 6.5 days, or just a little more than that actually, without fossil fuel or traditional energy sources, using what in 2017 was the world's largest lithium-ion battery, powered by about 65% wind power and 35% solar. And finally, today's last piece of good news, in honor of the recently departed TV icon in the United States, Betty White, star of Golden Girls and The Mary Tyler Moore Show and many others, fans and other celebrities raised over $13 million in donations to support animal shelters and animal organizations through the Betty White Challenge, which was held on what would have been her 100th birthday, January 17th of 2022. Betty White was a huge supporter of animal rights and animal support and protection organizations, and a lot of people felt that this honored her legacy. Shelters across the United States received tens of thousands of dollars in donations as a result of this effort, and hopefully will start an annual tradition of giving to support those who can't speak up for themselves in the way that we can. Hope that lifted your spirits a bit. I think we could use more good news, don't you? Let's get to today's guest. In 1979, Jakob von Uexkull thought the Nobel Prize could do more. He went to the Nobel Foundation with an idea: that they add 2 new prizes to their globally famous and highly respected list of awards given to those who had accomplished great feats for humanity. One award for achievement in environmental and ecological work, and one award specifically designed to celebrate and magnify work done in developing and poor nations. Jakob had observed that many of the recipients of the Nobel Prizes were from developed countries, and felt that there was underrepresentation from many nations around the world, especially those where a lot of very important work in human rights was being done. Coming from a noble family in northern Germany, Jakob offered to fund these new awards for the Nobel Foundation himself. All they would have to do is create the awards and facilitate the choosing of the recipients and the giving of the awards. The Nobel Foundation declined. So, in 1980, still believing that there ought to be recognition globally for accomplishment in environmental and ecological protection and sustainability, and the growth of human rights in underdeveloped nations, Jakob founded his own award, the Right Livelihood Award. Since 1980, the Right Livelihood Award has awarded between 2 and 5 awards every year to what they call Changemakers, individuals or organizations throughout the globe doing work in several categories, including human rights, environmental protection, sustainable development, health, education, and peace. The award not only brings the work of its laureates to the global stage, these laureates also receive a financial award to grow their work. The notoriety which comes from the award often brings additional donors and sponsors of their work to the table, and these laureates also become part of the global network of other laureates who they can collaborate with, gain support from, and learn from. Right Livelihood laureates are massively diverse. If you check their website out and learn more about who they've awarded in the past, they represent countries from every continent. And you do start to see Jakob's point that many of the global awards are given to folks from developed nations who do something for the developed world. Past Right Livelihood laureates that many of us are familiar with include Swedish environmental activist Greta Thunberg, hugely famous American whistleblowers Edward Snowden and Daniel Ellsberg, American journalist Amy Goodman, Petra Kelly, a founding member and leader of the German Green Party, and Mordechai Vanunu, the Israeli nuclear whistleblower and peace activist, who served 18 years in prison for his disclosures and is still to this day not allowed to leave Israel or speak to foreign journalists. The following are voices of current and past Right Livelihood laureates, including Mordechai and others.
My name is Ed Snowden. I, sitting my desk, certainly had the authorities to wiretap anyone from you or your accountant to a federal judge to even the president if I had a personal email.
People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
I believe we, the people, have the right to speak and express without any fear.
So Monsanto came illegally with the promise that they would increase farmers' incomes and have this magical technology to control pests. Well, the bollworm is now resistant. Farmers are in debt. Farmers are committing suicide. The area's been ruined. The pollinators are gone. The groundwater's gone. Punjab, the most fertile land of India, was destroyed.
We envision our young children not having to fight to live on their land, not having to fight to have clean water, to live in peace and harmony with the land.
Education is the key and stone of the life of each human being.
We also see a society where the concept of rights extends and is not limited only to humans but extends to animals, trees, rivers, and all ecosystems.
That last one gives me chills every time. Right Livelihood laureates are not afraid to speak up in the name of justice and human rights and in the name of the earth and its resources. The 4 2021 laureates, who just received their awards last month in December in Sweden, where the foundation is based, include Vladimir Slivyak, a Russian environmental activist, Frida Husin, a Canadian Indigenous and land protection leader, Mart Wandu, an activist from Cameroon focused on protection and rights for women, girls, and children, and Legal Initiative for Forest and Environment, or LIFE, a legal organization in India, which supports grassroots community efforts to protect local environments from global corporate exploitation and from the removal of resources from locals' land. The name Right Livelihood for the foundation and the award was inspired by an idea in Buddhism. The Eightfold Path in Buddhism are the 8 core beliefs which guide daily life for those who follow the Buddhist teachings. Jakob was inspired by the Buddhist teaching of right livelihood, one of the 8 core beliefs, one of the Eightfold Path, which teaches that the right way to earn one's living, according to these teachings, is to do work which is just, honorable, and sustainable for the individual, their community, and the environment around them. In other words, for the world. According to the Right Livelihood Executive Director and our guest today, Ole von Uexkull, this idea is at the heart of the Right Livelihood Award, whose mission is, and I'm quoting here from Ole, to highlight people who are creating a future where everyone can live peacefully and sustainably without suffering injustice, showing the ingenuity of the human spirit in seeking to not only survive, but thrive. The Right Livelihood Foundation and Award serves to amplify the voices of people who are changing the world for the better. So you can imagine why we wanted to invite Ole on the show. Of course, we were thrilled to speak with him. And we were even more thrilled because Ole happens to have family in Hamburg, where I live in northern Germany, and he was available for an in-person interview. So we met up just before the holidays late last year to have a conversation, our first live interview since our first episode back in early 2020. It was so nice to speak to Ole face-to-face. You may not have heard of Right Livelihood before today, although it is highly prestigious in its own right, especially in global human rights circles. But by the end of our conversation, I think you'll agree it deserves to be at least as well known as the Nobel Peace Prize, and deserves to be covered in the global press a lot more. We should be talking about these laureates and their work on a much larger scale, I think, than we do now, even though this award does amplify these messages in a really brilliant way. Right Livelihood laureates are people who are not only imagining better, but actually transforming systems and conceiving solutions and building them, transforming lives, building new paths toward a better world through their work, paths that we can all follow. Well, today I'm really excited to be joined by Ole von Uexkull, live for an in-person interview, which we haven't had the chance to do for some time. So it's really nice to be here with you, Ole. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's really nice to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. So Ole is the executive director for the Right Livelihood Foundation. And Ole, if you don't mind, maybe start by describing the focus of the foundation. What is the work primarily that the foundation does, and what's the mission?
So primarily, and the whole founding idea of Right Livelihood was to present awards. Since 1980, we've been awarding the Right Livelihood Award, usually 4 laureates every year. And through that work, we've grown an amazing network of laureates in now more than 70 countries around the world. And our work has really developed a lot now, also working actively with this network.
Would you describe some of the work that you do with the network? I think in researching the organization a bit, you see how inspiring some of these individuals are that have been honored with the award. And that is a question I had. How does the relationship sort of evolve with these individuals over time after they've been given the award? What are the opportunities for them to connect with each other and kind of grow their impact together in collaboration with Right Livelihood? I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, that's a super interesting question, because the starting point in everything we do was 40 years ago. In 1980, we started, and still is today the choice of laureates. We receive nominations from all around the world, and we have as our only criteria that we want to honor exemplary solutions to urgent global problems. People who both have a vision for how the world could be very, very different from what it is now, but who are also already successfully taking the practical steps in that direction. And because of this very open criteria of what the award is meant for, we end up with a network of laureates which is as diverse as the problems we have in this world, and thus the active work with this network, connecting them, supporting them, of course, is really, really fascinating. It's also something where we need to make sure that, we have to make priorities, because we now have almost 150 active laureates who are still alive and active around the world. So that goes along a couple of strands. We have United Nations consultative status, so we work actively connecting laureates with the UN. We have an educational network around the world, also in the US, where we connect laureates with educational institutions. And of course, we connect them with each other, which is also super powerful.
What are some of the opportunities that come from these educational opportunities? That sounds like a really interesting tack that the organization takes, which is maybe to connect these laureates with universities where students can learn from these individuals and be inspired by their example, the work that they're doing, learn more about a problem from someone who's very close to it, who knows it very well. Would you describe more about how that program works? And if you haven't, maybe any examples of, what has happened in those relationships in the past?
Even that educational work is super broad. We work with universities at undergraduate levels. We work with PhD programs. We work, for instance, with the world's largest academic program for human rights, which is the Global Campus of Human Rights. That's a network of 100 universities worldwide. And we do that because our laureates, who are first and foremost practitioners, because a lot of knowledge is created all the time in the laureates' work at the forefront of really important social courses, environmental courses, peace and human rights courses. And thus, for universities, it's super interesting to link up with these change makers who are at the forefront of social change processes, both in order to understand them better, and in that way also maybe to feed back into the laureate network and inform the laureate network about, how do you conceive of processes of social change? How could they be more effective? But also, as you say, of course, as role models for students. Sometimes that takes the shape of, something directly to copy or to scale up. But more often, I would say the laureate would be a role model just in the values, in the attitude of being a political citizen, of being a change maker, of claiming political spaces, which for someone who attends any of our educational programs could be a different cause in their setting, in their, the point of change processes that matter to their community or to their country. But still, it's an attitude that you can be inspired by, and that you can, mirror your own courses against, and get also at the methodological level a lot of ideas for what it means to fight for something that you care about.
Yeah. I love what you said about the fact that the laureates are doers. They're change makers. They're building something. So in a way, I think it's probably very powerful for students to connect with them, because they're in the academic world, which is important, but can sometimes be one step removed, I think, from, how things actually happen out after, graduation or something. So to have someone come in who's not theoretical, they're not in the academic world, they really are building something or have built something, I think that's probably very powerful. Is that, would you say, maybe one of the criteria for the laureates typically is, they're not theorists, they're not working in a philosophical way, they're very much making something and changing something materially on the ground. I mean, I don't know if that's a conscious, evaluation point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, being very practical and solution-oriented is one of our values as Right Livelihood, but we also really bring that together always with the visionary quality of their work. They really have to have someone who becomes a Right Livelihood laureate also has a concrete idea of where they're heading, right? As I said, how our societies could function very differently. And we're really interested in this intersection of practical change making and a vision for how the rules of the game could be very different. And because there are many great thinkers who have concepts about how the rules of the game could be different in our societies. And then you have fantastic entrepreneurs or so-called social entrepreneurs and doers who find really good solutions, maybe inspired by curing a certain symptom, but who are maybe not really question the larger rules of the game in the work that they do. And Right Livelihood laureates are at this intersection of, really working for the big change, but knowing that the change you want to see for tomorrow has to grow out of where we are today. So what is interesting is, first and foremost, it's interesting to talk about 2030, 2040, 2050, but the most important thing is tomorrow.
Yeah.
What is the concrete step that you take from here?
Right.
Not just lamenting about what is wrong, but in our chaotic daily settings, to be able to always devise the next step that leads us there, and sometimes in very challenging environments.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. That's so much about what we focus on our show, and so much about what we discuss with our guests is that, there are these solutions that are possible, and there are examples of those solutions everywhere if we can just identify them, become more aware of them, and then grow them.
And sometimes also laughably simple.
Yeah.
Really simple.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially, we talk a lot with food insecurity folks, whether nonprofit or even some companies, and just with a reorganization of how we use the food resources we have, where they go, essentially.
Right.
So instead of feeding, billions of cows or livestock to raise meat, we could actually funnel grains, tons and tons of grains, to many people around the world. Problem solved. Millions of people are suddenly no longer hungry. It's amazing when you find out about these things, and when you really meet the people who are on the forefront of envisioning what it would take to build the systems to make that happen, and then doing it.
And that's an interesting connection back to the universities, because experts sometimes are too deep in their field, say the expert of the food distribution chains or people who go on to work in the food industry. So they don't question these things any longer. Maybe they have an agronomist degree or so and are super knowledgeable in theory, but don't ask the obvious questions any longer. And that's the power of the practitioner who looks at, a practical problem, as long as it is informed by a larger wrong, right? And you also have to, because we're working in very imperfect societies and we have to make these compromises all the time, but you need to recalibrate yourself every now and then and look at the bigger picture again and question yourself, is it still relevant to the larger picture? But if you do that, then sometimes indeed the solutions are extremely simple.
Yeah. I'd love to hear about some of the laureates, just to bring some examples of people who've been featured to the conversation. Maybe if you'd be willing to speak about some of the laureates that were just awarded this year, just I think this month in December in Sweden, maybe one of the four or a few of the four for this year, maybe just sharing a little bit about their stories if you're able.
Absolutely. There are so many fascinating stories in the work of laureates, and it is our job to be both through the jury decision and the choice, but also then in an ongoing way to be in solidarity with them. So we were sitting now in Stockholm planning our next steps already with the 2021 laureates. They are from Cameroon, Russia, Canada, and India. From Cameroon, a lady who works in the northern part of the country for the protection of children and girls, primarily from sexualized violence and from harmful cultural traditions like early marriage, and from the terrorist insurgency through Boko Haram, and does so in the most remarkable way by harnessing the power of community organizing, to to organize the social structure, which is also partly the problem, right? The traditions in those places, to organize them in a way so that, for instance, there are girls' self-help groups and girls' vigilant groups that then would be the ones who warn the community about a certain risk for their peers. And to institutionalize that by organizing people in a different way. And I mean, that has potential for so many other places in the world. And then we had three laureates this year, all from the environment/energy field, from 3 countries that are super important in the global fight against climate change, because they are on the large polluters side, because their governments have been slowing down international negotiations on the climate field, as they are such big producers of fossil fuels, with Canada, Russia, and India. So in Canada, we honored Frida Yusin of the Wet'suwet'en people in British Columbia, whose people are opposing a pipeline that would bring shale gas from the shale gas fields through British Columbia to the coast in order to be shipped to somewhere in Asia, probably. Very similar story in Russia. Vladimir Slivyak, one of the most important Russian environmental activists, who's been successful in organizing or inspiring, igniting the local resistance of people in the Siberian hard coal mining regions, from where the coal is taken by train to Vladivostok, to the harbors in the east, a lot of it, other parts also to the west, even here to Germany, where we're sitting now. And to show that it's possible in an authoritarian country like Russia to organize a local movement against the coal industry is absolutely amazing. And they even they won a court case about one new mine that was supposed to be open, for instance, which would even in Germany or Sweden would hardly be conceivable. And the third of those more climate-focused laureates is from India, a most remarkable small organization of lawyers who are specialized in environmental litigation and who've been both campaigning and upholding for a very high judicial standard when it comes to the defense of land rights in cases that are where people's livelihoods are at risk, are threatened by extractive industries. And it's super interesting to see that, of course, it's not always implemented. That's why they need to fight. But the standard of environmental legislation is really good in India. They even have a national green tribunal, kind of the highest appellate court for all environmental cases. So, that's just a really, really effective lever to use those instruments and empower communities to use them in their interest.
Their organization, if I remember, the acronym is LIFE?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Legal Institute for Forest and Environment.
Nice. I think what's so inspiring about each of these 4 is when you were describing each, the word community came up. And to me, what's interesting is the more I look around at the world, it seems like as global as we're becoming and have become, and as large as these global problems are, it almost seems like the community-based path is one of, if not the most powerful paths to making change.
Totally agree. That was also something that we could see in our nomination. I mean, in the whole of nominations that we received this year. So these 4 were chosen from, I think, 203. And we do some quantitative analysis of the entire, the large number of nominations. So, for instance, when someone sends us a nomination, which, by the way, is open now until the end of February,
anyone
on our website, rightlivelihood.org, people can go and make their nomination. And if you do that, you will be asked to fill in, to check a couple of categories, both methodological categories, like how is your nominee working, and topical categories. What issues is your nominee working on? So that allows us to see what topics are people and organizations working on in certain regions of the world, and what methods are being used for which causes and these kinds of things. And even there in the larger data set, so to say, you see how important community organizing is. And I think it is, that's kind of the smallest unit of political activism, because you can't change the world alone. But the moment you get together with others, and if it's a smaller group even, you multiply your power. And this concept of community is very interesting. And the English word is also very good. We don't have that really in Swedish in the same way, because a community can be a local group of people, but it can also be issues based. And that's the beauty, of course, of the new ways of organizing, also in electronic communication, that we can have, communities of people who find each other to work together on a certain topic. And there, I think, what we see in the nominations is both how, of course, many countries in the world are limiting the space for that kind of organizing to take place. We even see that, even when people get organized on topics that are not in themselves threatening to the government, in many places of the world, just the fact of the getting organized is what governments feel threatened by, which is also what tells us that it's effective, right, on the other hand. Yeah. But then we also have countries like Sweden, like still the US, like Western Europe, where people do have all these political rights, and they're not even using them to the fullest, right? So here you could say the space for political participation is suffering from not being made used of enough. It is not occupied enough. It is there in theory, but we're not claiming it fully. And that's also about, I would argue that it also starts with getting together with other people and articulating concerns or visions together.
Yeah, absolutely. It almost seems like this idea of community organizing is getting this renaissance in a way. And I think in some parts of the world where it can be very difficult and sometimes even dangerous to organize in this way, it's growing through technology, probably, because technology empowers us to build communities in ways that we don't even have to be physically together, which keeps us safer in some ways sometimes. At least it's about sharing ideas and information, which is very powerful. But even in Western countries like the Fridays for Future movement, it's really exciting to see young people feel like the power of a community, sharing a space and sharing an idea together and communicating their values and their desires from the powers that be, the authority figures in politics and business. And I think you make a really good point, though, that we have a lot of advantages in many developed countries to organize that we don't take advantage of. Mm-hmm. We know that we have this freedom to do these things, but there's a lot of distractions in the world. So that's why conversations like this, I think, are so important. And the stories that the Right Livelihood organization really tells through its laureates are so important.
And again, it's so simple. And you mentioned the Fridays for Future movement when I was at one of the first larger rallies in Stockholm, and there were all these young kids marching, and it was so moving to, beautifully surprising that I think for most of them it was their first demo. But they all knew how to do it, like it was in their DNA almost. And I think that's something really, really beautiful and really, really important in our consumerist societies, that we start to think of ourselves as first and foremost political beings. And then, the market, the market has its function, and you can say in the market we work maybe according to the homo economicus that maximizes personal benefit. That is there, we have, and you can use that for certain allocation mechanisms, but first and foremost, we are social beings, right? We are, and that means, in modern societies, political beings. And that starts by, again, organizing, mobilizing with others.
And remembering, too, that these corporations can't exist without us sustaining them. So yes, if 100 people choose to not purchase a type of product because it's very bad for the environment, for example, or something, it's a small impact. If 10,000 people say we will no longer purchase these types of products unless changes are made, unless it's more sustainable, or unless it protects human rights, then real change can be made. So to remember that every choice we make every day does impact the world. So as you said, we are beings in this system who are shaping it with every choice we make, and we have power in that. And if we can, align on similar values and only carry out behaviors that align to those values, then, we really can be very powerful. And you see small examples.
But even more, I would say, also through political processes. I mean, yes, that the conscious consumer is important to start new trends in the market, but I don't think we can rely on and we can even demand, people to be conscious enough to always make the right consumer choices. So yeah, of course, being a consumer is also political, just as everything is political. But I think it's even more important to organize and demand through lawmaking that the right controls and regulations and circumstances for markets are great. Because, obviously, it's very obvious that markets can't exist without a regulatory framework, right? Otherwise, Somalia would be the dream country for international businesses to operate in, which is
that's a really
obviously
good point. Yeah,
actually not the case. And it's up to society to define that framework that businesses operate in, and obviously it has to be reliable for businesses. And
right, you think of sort of the free market idea in the United States, but the framework is needed for it to be for it to grow.
Totally, and it's in creating that framework, which in the end is a political decision, where we're all equal in terms of equal voting rights, and the parliament that takes these decisions is democratically elected. In the marketplace, we're not equal. Not equal at all. There's, I think, 1% of the world's population own more than twice the wealth that 90%, the lower 90%, have, and that of course has eroded our democracies to very large degrees already. And in all the ideas about consumers changing the world, etc., you just have to acknowledge that reality, that extremely distorting reality. And that aggravating reality also, which, capital is growing much faster. You accumulate much higher dividends on capital than you do on labor, which is what someone without capital has to make money. So that's really, I think, the fundamental underlying problem. So much influence in society is, money is just so powerful. Influence, you can buy almost everything, and that is why it's extremely toxic for societies that wealth and control of resources is so unevenly distributed.
Right. Yeah, which is why ideas and the sharing of those ideas within communities is, I think, really one of the most powerful ways that anyone can make change, becoming part of a community and then rallying around values, which are ideally immune to, the influence of money. This raises a point that I wanted to... Ideally, yes, but in
reality, not at all. Right. So
yeah, that's the hard part. And, it raises an interesting point, I think, around how to, sometimes disrupt these systems, or at least offer an alternative path from the story that big business often wants to tell. So I don't know, I'd love to hear about the individual in Russia that you were speaking about, and just how, I'm sure, challenging and possibly also dangerous it was for him and is for him to do his work in an authoritarian country, as you said, and, where government is so closely tied to financial interests as well. And I'm sure that some of the laureates are protected by the awards that they receive from Right Livelihood, because a lot of the time, at least from what I know, someone who's doing very dangerous work, if more people know about them, then they're likely more protected, because then, there are repercussions if they are hurt or killed. So,
Yeah, that is obviously something that we need to analyze very carefully in every individual case. And luckily, we have a team at our Geneva office where we have consultative status with the United Nations, and we're using it so far mainly to liaise with the human rights mechanisms in Geneva, like the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the different special rapporteurs and the Human Rights Council. And there we have and we work with experts to analyze the security situations, which of course are extremely volatile, extremely complex, very hard to predict. I mean, right now, as we speak, we're facing probably the closure of our laureate organization Memorial, the most important Russian human rights organization. They are taken to court. I mean, one hearing is tomorrow, a day before Christmas. The other hearing on the 28th, right before, between Christmas and New Year, when they know exactly that many journalists would have a few days off, and the UN is not in session in Geneva, etc. But as this situation has become, I mean, what used to work and what is definitely no longer the easy recipe for everything is kind of Western pressure or Western attention. That is even, maybe that worked 25, even 15 years ago, but now that is even used against people in many countries. There are all these foreign agent laws like they have in Russia also. I think something that we can do quite successfully still is we don't need to be perceived necessarily as a Western intervention. So in cases, for instance, on solidarity missions for threatened laureates, we take other laureates from other parts of the world with us to really send the message that human rights are universal values. So, for instance, the example of Memorial, over the last years, we've been organizing lectures on human rights together with them in Moscow, and then bringing a laureate from Africa or bringing another laureate from Latin America to also send a message in Moscow that this human rights topic that they are talking about and which they are hated for by the Russian government, that's not just an anti-Putin agenda, right?
Right, yeah. And then it's also no longer like a European organization to be seen that way who is speaking this way. It's,
Exactly.
Yeah,
I think the fundamentally important principle in every individual case of someone at risk is to accept that these people, the people that we work with, have accepted a certain risk already, right? I mean, their name is already out there. So it's a different situation than one where by highlighting someone you would expose them. And that is why we also analyze with the nominees, obviously, would the award help or maybe even put them in danger. And in almost all of the cases, when someone's already exposed themselves, then more attention is rather positive. And we also realize that, security has many dimensions, especially if you accept that someone has taken or is consciously taking a certain risk. It also has a psychological dimension. It has a dimension of, showing solidarity, being there with them. And in the end, I mean, doing what you can do, but also accepting that you can never, you can't offer 100% security.
You can't be someone's protector, even if you can help to amplify their message, certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think from what I've seen of the laureates that Right Livelihood has chosen in the past, it takes a lot of courage to stand in solidarity with some of these individuals. And I think that that's a really impressive and powerful thing. I mean, some of the past laureates include Edward Snowden and Daniel Ellsberg, who are sort of very famous Americans who sort of, did these things which were kind of rocked the boat in a global scale from a Western political perspective, but also like Vandana Shiva in India, who has taken on big agro-business, which is very powerful, extremely wealthy, and
quite influential.
In
Switzerland, for instance.
For sure. And in many ways, I think most people don't quite understand how powerful Monsanto, which is now owned by Bayer in Germany, and these people have almost unlimited resources, essentially. And so...
Which is the problem we spoke about
before.
Exactly.
So, I mean, to me, I think it's it's pretty amazing to see that these are some of the names on the list of past laureates, and these are the messages that are being amplified. And it almost, to me, identifies a gap in what some of these, I don't know if I should call one out specifically, but the Nobel organization, I think, honors a lot of amazing, innovative, inspiring people. But I think there aren't a lot of these stories of people who are really creating on the ground, grassroots, community-based change, encouraging people to stand up for each other where they are against whatever interests are exploiting them or the resources around them. And I just think it's really inspiring what Right Livelihood chooses to do as far as who they focus on for that reason. Because I think a lot of the people who are honored on the global stage are sort of a little bit more of a safe choice in some ways. Not to be critical, of course, that's not my intention, but it's sort of just true. A lot of, I think...
Hey everybody, so if you are enjoying today's episode, we would be so grateful if you would share it with others who you think would resonate with this message, with these stories. Also, take a second and hit the subscribe button. Leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening on, which helps us to grow our message and our mission to tell stories of people who are changing the world. Visit us at wecanremaketheworld.com to learn more about each of our guests, to look through the resources and information that we share on every episode, and to sign up for our mailing list so you never miss a new episode or a new inspiring story. Thanks so much.
It takes a lot of courage to be the kind of person who seems to be honored by Right Livelihood, and also courage from the organization to really support them. And yeah,
I mean, we're operating in a very safe space, of course. We don't have any real repercussions to be afraid of. So we're in a super privileged position there. But I mean, of course, the reactions were different when we honored someone like Ed Snowden, for instance, who's challenging the wrongdoing of an allied nation. Then we easily have the Swedish Foreign Office agree with us when we give awards to human rights defenders in countries that are not of strategic or military importance to us in Sweden. And then certainly when we honored Ed Snowden, we lost we used to always have our press conference in the Swedish Foreign Office, which maybe sounds odd also from an international perspective. But I mean, the Swedish government used to be on the side of the oppressed at times of Olof Palme, who was marching for Vietnam. And also I think that there was really a tradition of an open society where it was not odd to have a civil society organization for many years, as we did hold their most important press conference of the year in the Swedish Foreign Office. And in the year where we honored Ed Snowden, we informed them about it, I think, the day before, and they immediately cancelled that press conference. And later we even used, or what we had also had for 30 years, we had been allowed to present the award in the Swedish Parliament out of the same kind of idea, the parliament of the house for the people and for important civil society initiatives. And, first of all, we've lost a lot of that culture in Sweden. And I think from the parliament's side, the award to Snowden was what made us unpopular with certain people there. And again, it's odd, or it shouldn't be the case that that's an unpopular award, where someone who does kind of the same thing in, say, Russia.
Right, or Asia somewhere.
Or in a less geopolitically important country.
Right. Did you anticipate the reaction from the Swedish government? Do you think...
I mean, we're not going into... we were not naive.
Of course.
But still, of course, the point I made in all the press interviews about that is that we're talking about universal values, and in the way our jury decision went was not different than a jury decision for someone who's critical of the Indonesian government. Sure. Or the say Colombian government.
Yeah, that's what, again, I think what's one of the things I find so compelling about Right Livelihood is
the diversity of the laureates and the fact that you really do get a sense that, it's people sort of a similar mindset, but through many different lenses. But there is sort of this constant thread of just, courage and action-oriented, like actually taking on this problem and doing something to build the solution. And I don't know, I loved, when I was getting ready to speak to you today, I just loved looking at the information on each laureate and reading their stories. And they're not names that I've heard of in many cases. In some I have, but, and I'm just... These stories are incredible, and these people are so brave, and what they've chosen to build is disruptive to a lot of systems that are very powerful. And one thing I wanted to call out too is on the website for Right Livelihood, I love that each laureate has sort of a profile page, and then also ways that someone who's visiting the website can support that individual's organization or mission, and also ways to learn about the problem that they're trying to solve. Yeah. So there's an educational element, there's an action element, and there's also, I think there's a third now, which I'm forgetting. It's sort of learn, reflect and do. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, learn, reflect, and act. Would you speak about those sort of the importance of those three elements to how we should relate to these stories and to become a part of the solution ourselves?
Yeah, I think, as you say, this diversity is amazing, and I invite every listener to really go to our website and look into all of these individual stories. I'm trying to do justice to the entirety of them, like summarizing some of the general learnings, but of course it's so much richer to deep dive. And our ambition is that our website should be that platform where you can dive more deeply in. And also there's learning resources, and we know there are books and films about laureates, etc. And what I think what comes across when you do that is, first of all, and that's the learning dimension, a problem area and injustice, a wrong somewhere in the world which you may not have been aware of. And it's first, to understand really the importance and the greatness of some of these people's achievements, you need to understand the context they work in, and that in itself is hugely educational. And that only allows you to then understand and reflect better and draw our own conclusions from the methods they used to address this problem or this injustice. And as I said earlier, the methods, sometimes methods can be copied and applied to different circumstances, but sometimes it's also just about thinking for yourself, what would that look like in my circumstances, in my community, with the issues that I care about. Maybe the method is not the same, but the attitude of thinking of myself as someone who can change things and who can be an instigator of change, who can be the starting point of something, not doing it alone, but be the starting point of something. I think that's the basic takeaway from every one of these laureate stories.
Yeah, no, I love that. There's something that I noticed too on the website. The word courage comes up so frequently, and I wanted to ask about that. Sort of what, from your perspective, is the importance of courage in this world? Like, what's the context, I think, as it relates to the work that Right Livelihood is doing and to the laureates, but also for each of us, just as global citizens? What is the importance of courage when it comes to the type of world I think many of us want to build and be part of?
Courage is basically what it takes to go from awareness to action. And we have enough awareness by now.
It's time for action.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. It's a perfect, simple answer, which I love. So there's also something else I wanted to ask about, which I thought was so cool when I saw it. Would you speak about the award itself, the sort of physical, trophy, if you will, that's given to the laureates, and I maybe a little bit about the artist, because I think the design is very beautiful, but also what the sculpture is made of, the metal that it's made of, which I thought was really cool and I'd never heard about before.
Right. So the artist is Eva Hild, a well-known Swedish sculptor who the award is a typical shape for her. She works in different materials, and the material that we chose for the award sculpture is the sculpture is made out of metal, which is from illicit firearms collected in a project run by a Swedish organization in partnership with an NGO in El Salvador. So they melt the metal from the guns and call it humanium and say it's the world's most precious metal, because selling it then funds the project by which more firearms are collected in El Salvador.
Sure. So then there's financial incentive too for people to actually collect and pass on these firearms. So that's empowering the community in a way so that it drives the supply and then doing something really beautiful with it. And do you know where else this metal is used? Is it used elsewhere? Is it kind of more specialty for artists and things? Or
they even sell, I think, watches and bracelets. And so you can look it up on the internet. Humanium, the world's most precious metal. I think. Swedish Development Partner is the name of the organization that's running that project.
Really cool. Nice. Yeah, and the sculpture itself for the award is so beautiful. I mean, what else does it mean to receive this award as a laureate? I assume that I know because I did some research, but there's of course a financial award as well to help grow whatever work they're doing. And then, of course, the awareness and putting them on the global stage, giving them access to other laureates to network. Would you say these are the kind of primary, benefits, the things that the organization does to empower these laureates?
Yes, and the most beautiful connotation, which almost every laureate I have witnessed in all the acceptance speeches over the years have always said, is that it's not something that they see as their personal gain, but something they receive on behalf of the community of people who've been part of their work. And I think without that, our work would just be, the drop in the ocean. If we didn't know that every one of these people who receives an award stands for, first of all, dozens, hundreds, thousands of others involved in their causes, but also, knowing that the ones that we feature every year are chosen from hundreds and hundreds of nominations, it's really just the tip of the iceberg of the change that people are working towards and already achieving around the world. And that's the beauty of it.
Absolutely. And that's, again, a big goal for our show, is to just tell these stories so that more of us know about this, know about these people, these stories, see these examples, so that when, the news or whomever says, oh, the world is doomed or everything is terrible, it's like, no, there are solutions that exist that have already been created. We just have to understand more about them, learn about how they might work, and then build them, just make them bigger. And I'm
mindful, though, also that there are really, structural injustices that are poised against that change.
Right. Yeah. No, and having, being clear about that too for yourself, and understanding what it will take to overcome that as an obstacle is so important. Otherwise, it's very easy to just get stuck, I think. But something else you said I want to call out too, because I got chills while you were speaking, because in my mind, I imagined what it would be like to be one of the members of the community in the Indigenous community of the woman in Canada that you were speaking about, and for them to be working so hard to protect their own lands, and how difficult that is, and how scary it can be sometimes. I think one of their locations was raided by the Canadian government.
Just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. And so
they're armed to their teeth.
Right. To, of course, intimidate. Whether or not they intend to use it, just to show up with all these guns. Yeah. It's a message. Yeah. And so for the person who represents you to receive an award like this, and to then be given encouragement, that's really powerful. And women in many cultures throughout the Middle East, Africa, and elsewhere, the challenges that are inherent there. So to champion the work of a woman like the woman in Cameroon that you spoke about too. Being a young woman in Cameroon or Somalia, where, it can be dangerous even just to speak out on any level about anything, to see a woman like that be raised up, and to know that you are part of that community that's being recognized and seen. Somebody sees us and understands how important it is to talk about this, and to That's just really powerful. And I think it goes back to the community topic again. And I love what you said about how the laureates, it's really about celebrating the people around their project as much as it is about celebrating them.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, Ole, if you don't mind, I'd like to just ask a little bit about you too, and how you were brought to the organization, maybe a little bit about your path to it, or even just what sort of drives you. Why this organization? Why have you chosen to? Why is this the focal point of your professional life and your life? And how does it enrich your life? And I'd love to just hear more about your experience as the leader of an organization like this, if you're willing.
It's kind of a family affair for me because the founder was my uncle, and it was the first internship I ever did at the age of 18 or 19. I moved to Stockholm to work with the secretariat, which was really small at the time. And then, that was, and I thought that was my starting point. And I studied environmental science, and I worked in different places at the German Parliament for a while, and at the UNEP, UN Environment, for a while. And I always gravitated back to Right Livelihood because that was the leverage I saw there was nothing that I had ever experienced in other organizations I worked with. And very early, when I was 21 or 22, they asked me to do some of the research visits. Like we go and at least when there's not a pandemic around, we go and visit and research on the ground, like investigative journalists, the most interesting nominations that we get. So I had met some of the people who were nominated, and then I saw what an impact it had for them to receive an award, and how it really put their work in a new context, on a new level. So I didn't find anything else where I felt I could have more of an impact. And a couple of years later, they asked me to take over as director, and it was a very small secretariat in Stockholm at the time with 1.5 full-time positions. And then with a fantastic growing team, I built that up over the years, and now we're some 20 people, and I have the UN liaison office in Geneva also, which has become a really important strand in our work.
So I think you probably have a very unique and powerful perspective, just as somebody who sits between several cultures. I think, you mentioned to me earlier that you grew up in Germany, but you work a lot of the time in Sweden, and you've worked at the UN and in Geneva. And so I think your perspective includes like political and organizational insight, as well as cultural, and just by virtue of the work you've done for so long. What I'd love to ask you is, what do you think, sort of an everyday citizen, what are some of the most powerful commitments we can make or actions we can take to feel like we are part of a solution, whether the solution is environmental or related to human rights? Like, how can people who are in, Iowa in the United States or Thailand feel like they're getting involved somehow? Like, what guidance would you give to citizens who just want to say, I'm part of doing something that's having an impact in the world?
I think that many people feel or know what they would like to change, and that's where the courage aspect comes in again. The only thing I can say is take the first step. Get going.
Yeah.
And very important as a first or second step is to get together with others.
Yeah.
To organize. And, most of us have something just outside our doorsteps, like if you mention Iowa, ballistic missile silos, for instance, to protest against, or to change, or to build your own business idea, or, the opportunities are really, the sky is the limit for what we can do, especially in settings in countries where we are blessed to have the right for free speech, to get organized. There's really, nothing that should stop us from that. And once you've overcome that first maybe inertia or nervousness or so, or if maybe you haven't spoken out or stood up for an issue that matters to you politically before, very quickly you'll realize it's a lot of fun. It's not easy, and it requires a lot of endurance, but it's also very fun and super meaningful.
Yeah. Great. And finally, what would you say to people who want to learn more about Right Livelihood and maybe get involved in some way there? How can people sort of support Right Livelihood and grow the mission? I'd love to see like Right Livelihood Awards on the front page of the New York Times, like the Nobel Prizes. I mean, like, I don't see a lot of, again, I said this sort of earlier, but awards given out to people who are really making change in environmental issues or sustainability kind of topic. Like, there's not really a global conversation as far as highlighting people who are leading the way. And Right Livelihood is one of the few organizations I've seen, I think, that are doing that on the global stage, but I just want to see it. I want to see it more. I wish everybody.
I mean, there is a global conversation in the sense that people around the globe are talking about it, but it doesn't make the main
right. But nobody's
headlines.
Talking about the solutions. Yeah. Nobody's saying, "Oh wow, like here's the progress we've made on the ground." Like governments talk about the progress they are making with CO2 emissions, or like COP26 or the Paris Climate Accords. We hear a lot about that. You don't hear a lot about this gentleman in Russia or this woman in British Columbia or people who are planting forests and transforming how we renew some of the resources that we're going through so quickly. We don't hear so many of those like specific stories, I don't think.
No, I mean, thanks to social media, everyone's their own journalist these days for good and for bad, but definitely, go to our channels, go to laureates channels, share the message, but also take the time to learn, to get inspired, to digest some of these stories, be it our laureates or all the fantastic material that is out there, and see what it means to you and where you find your voice and your activism.
Yeah, through technology, we have a daily opportunity to be part of this story, if we want to be, and whatever our contribution is up to us. But we can be involved every day if we make that choice. So.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to speak to you and to learn more about Right Livelihood, and really excited to share today's conversation because I just loved learning more about it and diving in. So thanks so much, Ole.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Ole said something that stuck with me when he was speaking about the young people who participate in the Fridays for Future marches around the world. He said that these young people often had never been part of a demo or demonstration or protest before, but it was like they instinctively knew how to do it once they took part, once they joined these marches. Ole mentioned that it was almost part of human DNA, that we just know innately how to come together in communities and advocate for our values in a way. They just knew how to do it. Well, if that's true, let's remember who we are. Let's make greater use of that innate knowledge within us to connect with each other, to build coalitions and communities, and to come together around specific ideas that we hold very deeply. Let's get out together and speak up for the changes that we want to see in the world. And let's not forget how precious that right is to speak freely, to advocate for your values, and how many people in the world don't enjoy that right. The longer I'm alive, I feel like the more I'm drawn to stories of direct action and activism, and especially around communities and community building. The more I see of the world, to me, the more I believe that we each have the responsibility to take it upon ourselves to be part of changing the world for the better, each in our own way. It's up to us. It's so much more effective when it comes from people on the ground, not from governments or global bureaucracy in some way. I really think it's time for all of us to become part of this conversation of how we want to live in this world and the world that we want to be part of. It's time to join that conversation on a daily basis and really gather around ideas that we can agree on, build community around it, and then advocate for it. In many ways, but I think gathering together physically in a place and demonstrating, marching, that's powerful, and it has changed the world many times. Let's not forget that, especially after a long period of not interacting with each other directly, of staying inside and closing ourselves off from each other for good reason. But as we come out of our homes again, let's remember that we have these tools available to us. And that's where we'll start for our 3 Changemakers, which we do every guest episode. 3 ideas inspired by our guest that could reshape our world for the better. So Changemaker number 1, it's time to exercise our voices now. Individual, community, and our collective voice. To remember the examples of past movements that we have available to us, to bring life back into people's movements around the world. We are so fortunate to live in a time with so much access to information, and that includes access to examples of movements that have worked in the past and how their leaders built those movements. Within seconds, we can read about how Gandhi did his work in South Africa and India. We have access to his books in digital format or physical format if we go to the library or on Amazon. We can learn about Martin Luther King, how he formed his ideas around civil disobedience and how he was successful with his tactics, how Nelson Mandela transformed a nation. We can also find examples of movements that are happening right now, just by doing a quick search on the internet, to stand up for the rights of people and planet all around the world. We won't find many of these stories in the mainstream news unless they're highly political and very large scale. For example, Hong Kong and everything that's been going on there in the last year to 18 months. We have to seek these stories out a lot of the time unless they're on that scale, but we can get inspiration from them anyway, no matter how small they are or how hard we have to look for them, and begin to form our own movements in collaboration with like-minded people all around the globe. It's an unprecedented time of collaboration and coordination to have marches in dozens of cities around the same idea at once. We've never had that opportunity before. It might be time to hit the streets again. It might be our best way to be sure that we can protect our planet and really advocate for human rights in a deeper way and demand that corporations honor them. Changemaker number 2. We should never take our right to gather, our right to express free speech for granted. We have to be watchful, even in countries where there is a perception of unlimited free speech, where we think that that right won't be infringed upon or taken away. I want to tell you about a law making its way through the UK Parliament at the moment that I learned about. It's called the Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Bill. And it contains the following proposed powers for the police. Again, this is in the United Kingdom. To stop and search protesters without suspicion, so for no reason, just because the police officer deems it to be necessary. It would make locking oneself onto something a crime, so protesters could no longer chain themselves to trees, for example, to prevent them from being cut down, or lock themselves to bridges in order to protest something in a city, for example. That would now be illegal. Protests would be enforced with a start and end time. There would be noise limits set on protesting, and you could go to prison for up to 10 years if you damage a memorial, which the Black Lives Matter protesters did in Bristol in the United Kingdom in 2020. That would now be a punishable offense with a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. All of these rules are designed to make it more difficult to protest, to make it more restrictive and constrictive. You have to fit within the boundaries of what suitable protesting is, which takes away the whole point of protesting. Protesting is there to disrupt, to call attention to something which is otherwise being ignored or downplayed. The whole idea of civil disobedience is built on the foundation of doing something which is outside the norms of society. Protesting requires disruption. So restrictions like these are very concerning. Some of these measures are still being debated, and it's not that it's all passed yet, but it almost feels like the government has included so many points to increase the power of the police to restrict protesting, with a few outrageous ones purposely peppered in there, knowing that some of these restrictions will still make it through and still pass in this bill. Each of the proposed new rules would change protesting in the United Kingdom forever. So for those who are risking a lot in countries like China and Russia and others to speak out now, let's stand in solidarity with them and lend our voices to theirs. And let's also be sure that we're watchful of proposals like this bill in the UK, and frankly similar bills in Australia and in certain states within the United States. Or we may find ourselves risking everything to speak out while we still can where we are, too. And changemaker number 3. If we learn anything from the example of the Right Livelihood laureates, I think that it's that our true arena for change is on the ground, amongst communities, through grassroots movements and political actions, and through collaboration across communities. I struggle to come up with an example of legislated change or bureaucratic change that was truly meaningful, that really turned the tide in some way for human rights, for environmental protection. Gay marriage, for example, was legalized across the United States 46 years after the Stonewall riots. It was a community movement that started the conversation to begin with, and then the law caught up several decades later. The rights for women to vote across the Western world took protests, marches, deep sacrifices by brave women. Some of them even gave their lives and stood in very dangerous situations against systems of power. Support from communities bolstered their voices, and over time, it made its way into law. The law came later. That's why I applaud Right Livelihood so much and find these laureates so inspiring. These awards go to people who have actually built engines of change within their communities and then gotten results, not waiting for governments to do it for them, not waiting for even non-governmental organizations and public nonprofits to do it for them. They built it themselves, and they got results. Let's learn from their examples and find ways to amplify these voices in our own communities. And let's reach out to support these voices across the globe. Voices like the 2021 Right Livelihood laureates, who are fighting for environmental protection and conservation and the rights of women and girls in their respective countries and communities, and doing it successfully. Let's show that their voices are heard, recognized, and that we want to help them grow their message and their mission. And let's build similar movements in every community across the globe. Here's what you can do to make a difference today. When it comes to Right Livelihood and supporting their mission, you can start by learning more about past Right Livelihood laureates and their work. Visit rightlivelihood.org to explore the stories and missions of all of the past Right Livelihood laureates. They're all fascinating and inspiring and unique individuals, and I absolutely recommend you go spend some time with their stories. If you're especially inspired by one of the past Right Livelihood laureates or their mission really resonates with you, consider supporting their work. And that could mean you share it with others, you reach out to them to offer your time or resources, or you donate to support their work and help it grow. If you're a college student or teacher, and that's undergrad or grad school, Right Livelihood actually has a relationship with UC Santa Cruz. They have a Right Livelihood College, which is part of UC Santa Cruz, which allows students to learn directly from laureates about the work they're doing, the systems they're building, the vision that they have to change the world, so that students can become mentored by these laureates. Students around the world, even if they can't join the volunteering or internship opportunities, can join for virtual events and educational programs. So check them out at rightlivelihood.ucsc.edu if you'd like to learn more. And what we can all do is just become part of these conversations. Even if you don't donate or volunteer or spend hours learning about every single laureate, just become part of these conversations around environmentalism and human rights, because they are the topics of our time. The rights of people, the rights of the planet, the rights of all living things. I see this more and more coming up everywhere. Take it upon yourself to contribute to these important conversations happening every day, and bring these conversations into your communities. Understand what your role could be. And that brings us to our challenge for today's episode. Today's challenge is be an activist for a day, or a week, or a month. Just get a sense of what it's like to speak on behalf of someone or something else. A cause that you believe in. Find one if you don't already have some that you're passionate about. Choose that cause, make it your own, and find a way to get involved directly. You can look to see if there are marches or protests if there's something that requires protesting in your area, or even virtual forums to lend your voice to within your community with your chosen cause. Speak up about your chosen cause to those in your circle, your close friends, your family, your coworkers, and online on your social media accounts if you're on social media, or in whatever forum you think is best for you. But get that feeling of being an activist, of being an advocate for something greater than yourself. I'll say that every time I've done this in my life, and frankly, I could be better about doing it more consistently too, but every time I have, I feel great. I feel powerful. I feel like I have purpose. I feel connected to something bigger than me, which already makes it worth it. Regardless of the outcomes, getting connected with a community that has ideas which line up with yours is really powerful. And I think, unfortunately, we've lost a lot of that opportunity to feel that in not just our pandemic lives, but frankly, as we move more and more toward virtual interaction through technology. I think it's a rare and powerful experience to share space with folks who, again, are passionate about a cause that you believe in. And I encourage you to find an opportunity to do that where you are over the next couple weeks. We say this often on our show, but it's true. We ultimately are shaping the world every day with our words and our actions. And each of us are either moving within our own lives toward a more sustainable and equitable world, or toward a less sustainable and less equitable world. And that's true also of our communities, as many of us as individuals make that choice. And then it goes beyond our immediate communities to the global community. So the trend really starts with you and with me, and then within those close to us, and then on a global scale. Become a voice for the path which takes us to a better world, based on values of equality and protection of the rights of all living things and protection of the earth. Give yourself the opportunity to feel like you're part of that cause, that you're standing for it actively in your life, and notice how it affects your day-to-day. Lend your voice to this crucial conversation so that you don't miss one of the greatest opportunities available to us at this time to rethink and rebuild the world into something better than it is. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode featuring a past Right Livelihood laureate. We'll be speaking with Vandana Shiva, activist, author, speaker, self-described eco-feminist, community organizer, and warrior for the rights of the earth, the rights of ecological systems, the rights of farmers, and all people. You do not want to miss that conversation. She is amazing. Thanks for being with us today, as always. Until then.
The attitude of thinking of myself as someone who can change things and who can be an instigator of change, who can be the starting point of something. I think that's the basic takeaway from every one of these laureate stories.